Well, howdy y'all. My name is Osasere Igbinoba, or OSA for short. I am a PhD student here at Washington State University working with Dr. Carolyn Ross. And today I'm excited to talk to y'all a little bit about my project, Yogurt Texture and Older Adults. So just to give you all a quick little look at what we'll be talking about today, we're going to start by going over my background and objectives and diving into my current work as I am in the process of doing my data collection right now. And lastly, ending with a little bit of next steps and what's to come. So let's dive into it. What is the background and objectives of my project? So the global population is rapidly aging. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65, which classifies as an older adult. With aging comes a lot of difficulties, specifically when it comes to eating and a decline in eating capabilities. So eating capabilities are the unit processes required to conduct eating. This falls into 5 categories: hand manipulation, oral sensation, cognitive and coordination, and oral manipulation. In addition to that, older adults struggle to achieve adequate nutrition and dietary qualities due to changes in physical things, changes in food consumption and food habits, and also the changes in their oral processing abilities. This is also going to change what drives their food choice and their food preferences. So where does dairy come into this picture? An increased dairy intake can benefit older adults through a reduced risk of chronic disease, mortality, and healthcare expenses. Most older adults still are able to consume dairy through old age, and many lean to yogurt as a simple and easy dietary supplement in their diets. The objective for my project is to define and understand the perception and preferences of older adults, age 60 plus, of different yogurts using both commercial and modified yogurts. A secondary objective specifically for the modified yogurts is looking at if yogurt as a medium can make some difficult textures for older adults a little bit easier for them to consume/swallow and provide less oral discomfort. My project is broken down into 2 phases that are kind of being ran simultaneously. The first looking at commercial yogurts and the second looking at modified yogurts. For this presentation today, we're going to primarily focus on the sensory analysis portion of my work, so the consumer panel and the train panel, as I'm in the process of running the train panel, and the consumer panel is starting here soon. So speaking of the consumer panel, I have the amazing opportunity to partner with Brigham Young University's Sensory Lab, working with Dr. Laura Jeffries and Amanda Rees in order to conduct the consumer portion of my panel. So it'll be conducted both here at Wazoo and then in Provo, Utah, led by myself. Across both universities, we have a goal of achieving 100 older adults to participate. So yeah. So onto my yogurts. So my commercial yogurts were donated by Chobani, and we're looking at 4 different yogurts. A fruit on bottom style yogurt, which you can see on the left bottom of this photo in these 3 pictures. And it has a jam ribbed through the product. A Chobani flip, which is not pictured, which is the traditional Greek yogurt with the addition of chocolate buttons or like little chocolate inclusions, the standard Greek yogurt drink, and then the regular Greek yogurt. Each of these yogurts were chosen for their variation in texture, and then standardized for their flavor as well as sugar level. Each of them have very distinct textures. The fruit on bottom is very different than the yogurt drink and very different from what the regular yogurt's going to look like, varying in either viscosity or thickness or firmness. For the modified yogurts, we're using vanilla non-Greek yogurts and adding in some inclusions to them. So 2 of these inclusions represent textures that are comfortable or easier for older adults to consume. And that's our chewy and our soft. For chewiness, we're using dried cranberries, and for soft, we're using canned mango. The 2 textures that we're using to represent the harder to consume textures is hard, adhesive, and rubbery. So for hard, we're going to be using some chocolate chunks, adhesive, sunflower butter, and for rubbery, we are going to be using boba balls or tapioca pearls. Now I'll dive into a little bit of what I'm currently working on with that training panel and consumer panel. So for my train panel, it's currently running. So it started this February. I have 13 panelists that I am training on the attributes of appearance, aroma, flavor, and texture. They're going through 7 weeks of training, which is approximately 25 hours of training. And the way training is set up is they have 2 sessions per week and one drop-in session. In sessions, we are going through each of the attributes, assigning standards to them, and then practicing how to assess the product effectively. As you can see in these photos, this is some of my panelists um, assessing a sample product. At the end, they'll do 5 days of final evaluation, where on each day they will be assessing 4 yogurt samples. The attributes that we're looking at are appearance, aroma, flavor, and texture, with texture being the big one on this one. So for this project, texture is king. So of all of these attributes, texture has the most number of attributes that we're going to be looking at. To identify attributes to use in these yogurts, I did 2 main things. One is I pulled attributes from literature, and then I also asked my panelists on the first few days of training, we did some attribute generation to pull out what attributes were present in those products. As I mentioned, texture is king for my project. So I wanted to go over some of the texture attributes and the standards that go with them. The standards essentially represent what the texture is, and allows the panelists to have a reference point when assessing the products. For example, Jiggly has 3 standards. It has a high, a low, and then a fun third one. So for more solid products, we're going to be using the Jello pudding and the regular Jello. And then heavy cream was actually added in order to represent what a more liquid product would look like, such as the yogurt drink, since the jiggle on that product will look significantly different than that of a more solid product. Next, we have ropiness, which is the degree of threading present in a yogurt product. So we have 2 standards for this, a high and low. Brown cow yogurt is a brand, and then stretchy yogurt is a mixture of Greek yogurt, milk, and a tapioca starch that I mixed together. As you can see in the photo on the bottom with the fork pull, it results in a very threaded and stretchy product. Next, adhesiveness. Adhesiveness is the ability that the amount that the sample sticks to you. And for this, we're using a mixture of mascarpone and sunflower butter. And lastly, graininess, we're using Jello pudding, but also grits to try and mimic as much of that grainy texture as you can possibly get. So my trained panelists are also evaluating the modified yogurt, so the ones that have inclusions present in them. For this, we're going to be looking at hard, soft, chewy, and rubbery. If you notice, adhesiveness is not on this list, as yogurts can be adhesive without the addition of an inclusion. So we're assessing that in all yogurts. But for these textures, my panelists are trained on evaluating for if they are present or not, in addition to the intensity of the presence. So if I hand them a sample that has no inclusion in it, it would automatically be a 0 for these textures. Versus if I do hand them one that has one, they are then able to assess. Each of these standards are just a representative measure of what the attribute is. So for example, I'm not placing carrots into the yogurt, but when they bite on that carrot, they know that, okay, my carrot is at an 8, so my sample is a little harder, and I'm able to put that at a higher number than that carrot. So for the consumer panel, as I mentioned, this is in partnership with BYU, and we'll be running it here in Pullman and in Provo, Utah. For each half of the study, we're looking at getting 50 people. Here in Pullman, we have 57 people currently recruited. The structure is a 2-day study with 1 hour on each day. The first day being mostly physiological characterization, and then trying those 4 commercial yogurts, and then day 2 being a survey as well as the modified yogurts. For this, they'll be trying 6 to 5 inclusions as well as a control with no inclusion. What does the survey look like? So the survey is broken into 4 big parts. There is the dairy consumption, which is going to look at frequency and consumption and preferences of yogurt products. The health history, which is probably the largest portion of this one, which dives a little bit into health conditions, medications, the general oral health Assessment Index, or the GO-HI. This is specifically looks at the oral cavity and if there are any issues present within that. And then the mouth behaviors. Mouth behaviors are how an individual processes food when they consume it. So you can either be a cruncher who likes to crunch on things, a chewer who likes to chew, a smoosher who likes to smoosh foods, or a sucker who has a preference for sucking on foods. And then next is texture consumption. So this is frequency of consumption and preferences for textures. This is based off of a list of textures identified for older adults in some previous research out of the Dr. Ross's lab. And lastly, a little bit of demographics information. For the consumer panel, what the ballot will look like is 5 big portions. For all of the samples, everyone will be assessing on the hedonic scale, which is going to be looking at liking of each of them. So this is overall liking as well as liking of the texture of the product. Then they're going to do a check all that apply for texture perception. This is when and where they're able to check which textures they feel like is present within the product. Then they'll dive into the oral discomfort and difficulty and ease of eating and swallowing measures. These are 2 recent measures pulled from literature that are used specifically on older adults to measure oral discomfort and difficulty. So this is a 5-point and a 7-point scale. Lastly, intensity is only going to be used for the inclusion products to see how prevalent they are within the product and see if we're actually able to decrease or increase the prevalence of issues with a texture. For my physiological characterization, we're going to be completing 3 big ones. The first being stimulated saliva flow. For this, we're going to be mimicking saliva production during mastication through the use of parafilm. And then next is olfactory function. So this is going to be looking at sense of smell. It looks at not just at their ability to smell, but also on their ability to recognize scents. And lastly, oral acuity using the oral grading orientation task. And this is going to be looking at their ability to recognize fine textures, and that's going to be using the 3D printed stamp present on the screen. So yeah, lastly, my next steps. So what I'm going to be continuing to working on this semester, as well as going into the summer, is completing my train panel and conducting my consumer panel, as my consumer panels here in Pullman start this weekend. And then going into the summer, analyzing the sensory data and then conducting the analytical analysis portion. Lastly, I just want to say a few acknowledgments. Thank you to Bill Derry for funding me and allowing me to do this really amazing research. Thank you to Chobani for donating my yogurts. And thank you specifically to Dr. Laura Jeffries and Amanda Rees at BYU for working with me on this project. Thank you to the School of Food Science and the WSU Sensory Center. And lastly, to my lovely lab mates for all their help and support. So yeah, questions?
Okay, I have one. What challenges did you face in collaborating with BYU? And then shoot, now I forgot it. What did you learn from that you can take forward into your career?
Yeah, I think for the collaboration with BYU is actually going quite smoothly. We'll be running that study in April. So after we run all of the Pullman versions of the study. I think the biggest challenge is working with 2 different universities and trying to get things approved on both ends. So I think going into like my career and further is ensuring that any collaborations are set up in a manner that both institutions understand what is happening and not just the individuals we're working with. But yeah, I think that's about it. So yeah, the biggest hurdle is just working with 2 separate institutions. So.
Okay, and then what do you think there's anything that you've learned that you will kind of take with you forever as relationships in the future, I guess?
Oh, I think it's definitely important. I think the biggest takeaway is it's important to be extremely detailed and organized in the process of working with another institution because you might have one way that you're used to doing something, but when you have to communicate that information across to people who are completely removed, it's good to have like a very detailed and very organized structure for everything. And I think that's probably my biggest takeaway.
Very good. Can you see the chat?
Um, okay, I can see it now. Did the teeth characteristics? So for teeth, the question is, did the teeth characteristics come into play when choosing people for this study? So we are not actually choosing people. Anyone can participate, but we will be asking in that pre-survey, there is a question about dentation on if they have dentures versus their full teeth or if they have missing teeth. So we did not disqualify anybody for this study based on their type of teeth. So for the other question, which is why not use Chobani low sugar or lower sugar options? For that one, we kind of wanted to use the standard or the standard yogurts. We did not want to dive into the low sugar realm, especially because that introduces potentially some off flavors with like the introduction of like sugar alcohols and like stevia and other things. So we really wanted to opt for what we could get across for all flavors. So like the yogurt drink as well as the fruit on bottom flavors, as well as not introduce any off flavors. So yeah.